I was standing in front of the full-length mirror in my hotel room, smoothing down the emerald green bridesmaid dress that had cost me $300 when the knock came at my door. The fabric felt expensive between my fingers, silk that caught the afternoon light streaming through the window of the Marriott in downtown Portland. I had specifically chosen this dress because Jessica said she wanted her wedding party to look sophisticated and elegant, and I wanted everything to be perfect for her big day. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm 28 years old. I work as a marketing director for a tech startup here in Oregon, and up until that weekend, I thought I had a pretty good relationship with my younger sister Jessica. We're only 2 years apart, and growing up, people always said we looked like twins with our dark hair and brown eyes, though Jessica always insisted she was the prettier one. I'd graduated from University of Oregon with a business degree, landed a good job right out of college, and had been living independently in my own apartment for the past 6 years. Jessica, on the other hand, had bounced between different majors, finally settling on communications, and had been living with our parents until she moved in with her fiancé Michael 8 months ago. Michael Thompson was a guy I'd actually introduced to Jessica 3 years earlier. We'd worked together at my previous job, and he was one of those genuinely nice guys who always brought coffee for the whole team and remembered everyone's birthdays. When he'd mentioned he was looking to meet someone special, I immediately thought of my sister. They'd hit it off instantly, and I'd been thrilled to play matchmaker. Watching their relationship grow over the years had been one of my proudest accomplishments, and when Michael proposed last Christmas, I was the first person Jessica called. The wedding planning had been intense. Jessica had specific visions about everything from the color palette to the flower arrangements, and she'd asked me to help coordinate a lot of the details since I was better with organization and had more disposable income than our other family members. I'd been happy to help. After all, she was my only sister, and I wanted her day to be everything she'd dreamed of. Over the past 8 months, I'd spent countless weekends driving to vendor appointments, taste testing cakes, and managing the growing list of tasks that seemed to multiply every week. So when Jessica knocked on my door that Saturday afternoon, I expected her to want to go over some last-minute detail, or maybe just to calm her pre-wedding nerves. Instead, she stood in my doorway wearing her white hotel robe, her hair already in curlers, looking oddly formal for someone who was supposed to be my sister and best friend. "Sarah, we need to run through the processional one more time," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was trying to sound authoritative. It was the same voice she'd used when we were kids, and she was trying to convince me to let her play with my toys. "The wedding coordinator wants everyone downstairs in the chapel in 10 minutes. Something about the way she said it made me pause. There was an undertone I couldn't quite identify, something that didn't match the casual nature of a wedding rehearsal. But I grabbed my phone and room key, slipped on my flats, and followed her down the carpeted hallway toward the elevator. The hotel was beautiful, with its classic Pacific Northwest aesthetic and views of the Willamette River. Jessica and Michael had chosen it specifically because it was where they'd had their first official date, dinner at the hotel's rooftop restaurant, 2.5 years ago. The chapel was small but elegant, with tall windows that let in the golden late-afternoon light. It could seat about 150 people, which was perfect for their guest list. White chairs were arranged in neat rows, and someone had already set up the altar with the floral arrangements I'd helped select and pay for. The flowers were gorgeous, white roses and eucalyptus with touches of that same emerald green that matched our dresses. They'd cost nearly $2,000, but I'd been happy to contribute since I knew how important they were to Jessica's vision. Most of the wedding party was already assembled when we arrived. There was Amanda Rodriguez, Jessica's sorority, sister from college who was serving as maid of honor, along with 3 other bridesmaids I'd gotten to know over the months of planning. On the groom's side stood Michael's college roommate serving as best man, plus 4 other groomsmen who were a mix of his work colleagues and childhood friends. Everyone was chatting and laughing, the kind of relaxed energy you'd expect from a group of people who were excited about celebrating love. The wedding coordinator, A efficient-looking woman in her 50s named Patricia was holding a clipboard and directing people into position. She'd been recommended by the hotel and had great reviews online, so I'd been the one to book her services 6 months ago. Patricia had a way of making everyone feel organized and calm, which I appreciated given how stressed Jessica had been about all the details coming together perfectly. All right, everyone, let's practice this processional one more time so tomorrow. Run smoothly, Patricia announced, consulting her notes. We'll start with the groomsmen entering from the side door, then the bridesmaids will come down the aisle in order. Jessica, remind me of the pairing arrangement? That's when something strange happened. Jessica cleared her throat and started directing people into pairs. Amanda, you'll walk with David, she said, pointing to Michael's best man. Kelly, you'll go with Ryan. Morgan, you'll be with James. And Stephanie, you'll walk with Chris. I stood there listening, mentally checking off the names and doing the math in my head. 4 bridesmaids, 4 groomsmen. That left me and Michael's friend Tyler, who worked at the same tech company Michael did. Tyler and I had actually hit it off during the engagement party, bonding over our shared love of hiking and craft beer. I assumed Jessica was saving our pairing for last since I was her sister. Instead, Jessica turned to Patricia and said, Sarah will walk down alone, about 10 seconds behind the other bridesmaids. The words hit me like cold water. I looked around the group, certain I'd misheard something. Everyone else had gone quiet, and I could feel their eyes shifting between Jessica and me. The chapel suddenly felt smaller, the golden light less warm. Alone? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. But what about Tyler? I gestured toward him, and he gave me a small, confused wave. He clearly hadn't known about this arrangement, either. Jessica's jaw tightened slightly, a tell I recognized from childhood arguments. It's better this way. Trust me. The coordinator thinks it will look more balanced. I turned to Patricia, who was looking at her clipboard with a frown. This was the first time we'd run through the full processional, and I realized that all our previous planning sessions had focused on other details like music timing and flower placement. I'm sorry, Patricia said slowly, but I don't recall discussing this particular arrangement. Generally, we try to pair everyone evenly. Well, this is what we're doing, Jessica said firmly. Sarah, you'll walk after everyone else, just before Amanda comes down as maid of honor. The reality of what was happening started to sink in. I was being singled out, separated from the group, made to walk alone while everyone else had a partner. In front of all these people who knew I was the bride's sister. In front of Michael's friends who knew I was the one who'd introduced the happy couple. It felt deliberately humiliating, though I couldn't understand why Jessica would want to humiliate me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Around 9:30, there was a soft knock at my door. I assumed it was housekeeping, but when I opened it, I found my cousin Maya standing in the hallway, holding 2 cups of coffee from the lobby. Maya was 25, Jessica's age, and had always been the family mediator. She had a gift for seeing situations clearly and speaking truth without being harsh about it. I brought caffeine, she said with a gentle smile. Can we talk? I let her in, and we settled on the small couch by the window. Maya handed me one of the coffees and studied my face carefully. She'd always been perceptive, even as a kid, and I could see her taking inventory of my emotional state. Last night felt weird, she said without preamble. The whole rehearsal thing, the seating at dinner, the speeches. I kept looking around wondering if I was missing something obvious. But honestly, Sarah, it felt like Jessica was deliberately sidelining you. The relief of having someone else acknowledge what I'd experienced was enormous. I'd been wondering if I was being oversensitive or reading too much into the situation, but Maya's perspective confirmed that my feelings were justified. I don't understand what's happening, I admitted, wrapping my hands around the warm coffee cup. 6 months ago, she was asking me to plan her bachelorette party and coordinate vendor payments. Now I'm walking alone and sitting with the extended family like I'm some distant relative. Maya nodded thoughtfully. Have you talked to her about any of this directly? I tried to ask about the walking arrangement yesterday, but she just said it was better that way. She wouldn't elaborate. I took a sip of coffee, grateful for the caffeine and the moral support. Maya, I introduced her to Michael. I've spent thousands of dollars helping make this wedding happen. I've been planning details for months, and somehow I ended up being less important than her sorority sister, who she hasn't talked to in years. That's what I don't get, Maya said, shaking her head. Amanda seems nice enough, but she barely knows current Jessica. You're the one who's been part of their relationship from the beginning. You're the one who helped Jessica through the whole engagement period when she was freaking out about whether she was ready for marriage. That was true. Jessica had called me in tears multiple times over the past year, questioning whether she was making the right decision, whether she and Michael were compatible long-term, whether she was too young to be getting married. I'd spent hours talking her through her doubts, reminding her of all the reasons Michael was perfect for her, helping her work through her anxiety about the future. Apparently, none of that emotional labor counted for much when it came time to assign wedding roles. There's something else, Maya said, lowering her voice even though we were alone in my room. I was talking to Aunt Linda last night after you left dinner early. She mentioned that she was surprised you weren't maid of honor, and apparently Jessica got really defensive about it. She said something about wanting to honor her friendships, not just family obligations. The phrase family obligations hit me like a physical blow. That's how Jessica saw me. Not as her sister who loved her and wanted the best for her, but as an obligation she had to manage. It explained everything about how I'd been treated throughout the wedding planning process, and especially during the rehearsal. Family obligations, I repeated slowly. That's what I am to her. Maya reached over and squeezed my hand. That's what she said, but that doesn't make it true. And honestly, Sarah, it says more about her than it does about you. You've been nothing but supportive and generous. If she can't see that, or if she's choosing not to acknowledge it, that's her loss. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the river traffic through the window. I felt clearer about the situation than I had since the rehearsal began. This wasn't about me being oversensitive or misreading social cues. Jessica had made a conscious choice to minimize my role in her wedding, and she justified it by reframing our relationship as obligation rather than love. What are you going to do? Maya asked gently. I'm going to get through today with as much grace as I can manage, I said. I'm going to walk down that aisle alone and hold my head high. I'm going to smile for the photos and celebrate their marriage. But after today, things are going to be different between Jessica and me. I'm done being taken for granted. Maya nodded approvingly. Good for you. You deserve better than being treated like an afterthought in your own family. After Maya left, I spent the morning getting ready slowly and deliberately. I did my own makeup, taking extra time to make sure everything looked perfect. I'd always been good with cosmetics, and I wanted to look absolutely stunning today. Not to upstage Jessica, but to remind everyone, including myself, that I was worth noticing and respecting. The bridesmaid dress looked even better in the morning, light than it had the day before. The emerald green brought out the gold flecks in my brown eyes, and the cut was flattering without being attention-seeking. I styled my hair in a low chignon that looked elegant and sophisticated, and I chose jewelry that complemented the dress without competing with it. As I was putting on my shoes, there was another knock at the door. This time it was Jessica, looking frantic and slightly disheveled, despite the fact that her hair and makeup appointment wasn't for another 2 hours. Sarah, I need to ask you a favor, she said without greeting me or commenting on how I looked. The florist is having some kind of crisis with the centerpieces, and I need someone to go over there and sort it out. You're better with vendors than I am. I stared at her for a moment, processing the request. Even on her wedding day, even after relegating me to walking alone and sitting with distant relatives, she still expected me to handle the problems and crises. She wanted my skills and my problem-solving abilities, but she didn't want to acknowledge my importance publicly. What kind of crisis? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I spent that entire rehearsal trying to make sense of what was happening. As we practiced the ceremony, I watched Jessica interact with Amanda like they were the closest of friends, laughing at inside jokes and whispering about tomorrow's timeline. It stung because Jessica and Amanda had barely spoken since college graduation 3 years ago. I knew this because Jessica had complained to me multiple times about how Amanda had gotten distant and self-absorbed after landing her marketing job in Seattle. Yet here Amanda was, wearing the maid of honor sash that should have been mine, acting like she and Jessica had been best friends their entire lives. During the practice ceremony, I found myself positioned at the far end of the bridesmaids lineup, physically separated from the maid of honor spot by the other 4 girls. From where I stood, I could barely see Jessica and Michael exchanging their practice vows. It felt symbolic in a way that made my chest tight. I was literally on the periphery of my own sister's wedding, treated like an afterthought despite months of planning and thousands of dollars in contributions. After the rehearsal ended, everyone headed to the hotel restaurant for the rehearsal dinner. I'd assumed I would sit with the wedding party, probably at the head table near Jessica and Michael. Instead, I discovered my place card at a table near the back of the room, seated with some of our distant cousins and family friends I barely knew. Meanwhile, the wedding party table was prominently displayed near the front, with Amanda sitting, in the spot of honor next to Jessica. I tried to tell myself I was being oversensitive. Maybe Jessica was trying to spread family around the room to make sure all the guests felt welcomed. Maybe she thought I'd enjoy catching up with our extended relatives. But as I sat through dinner listening to our cousin Mark's stories about his job at the insurance company, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with my sister. The final straw came during the rehearsal dinner speeches. Michael stood up to thank everyone who had helped make the wedding possible. He mentioned his parents, Jessica's parents, the wedding party, and various family members who had traveled from out of town. He even thanked the hotel staff and the wedding coordinator. But there was no mention of me, no acknowledgement of the countless hours I'd spent planning details, no recognition of my financial contributions to the flowers and other elements that were making their dream wedding possible. When Michael sat down, Amanda stood up to give her maid of honor speech. She talked about her friendship with Jessica, sharing memories from their sorority days, and expressing how honored she felt to stand beside Jessica on her special day. She talked about what a beautiful bride Jessica would be, and how perfect she and Michael were together. Again, no mention of my role in bringing them together, no acknowledgement of my relationship with either of them. I excused myself before dessert was served, claiming I needed to get some rest before the big day. But really, I needed to process what was happening. I took the elevator back to my room, kicked off my heels, and sat on the edge of the bed staring out at the city lights. Portland looked beautiful from the 10th floor, the bridges spanning the river like strings of pearls, but I felt completely disconnected from the beauty around me. That's when I started replaying the past 8 months in my mind, looking for clues I might have missed. The wedding planning had been Jessica's domain, but she'd consistently asked me to handle the financial aspects and logistical coordination. I'd paid for the flowers, the wedding favors, and the transportation from the hotel to the reception venue. I'd organized Jessica's bachelorette party, complete with a weekend trip to Napa Valley that had cost me nearly $1,500. I'd been the point person for coordinating with vendors, managing timelines, and solving problems when they arose. Yet somewhere along the way, I'd been demoted from sister and chief supporter to just another bridesmaid. Not even that, actually. I was a bridesmaid who didn't rate a walking partner, who got stuck at the kids' table, who wasn't important enough to mention in the speeches. I was being treated like a distant relative who happened to share DNA with the bride, not like someone who had been integral to making this wedding happen. I tried calling my best friend Rachel back in Portland, but it went straight to voicemail. She was probably out for the evening, enjoying her Saturday night like a normal person who wasn't questioning her entire family dynamic in a hotel room. Instead, I found myself opening my laptop and scrolling through social media, looking at the posts from the rehearsal dinner that were already starting to appear online. Jessica had posted a group photo of the wedding party, all of them raising their glasses in a toast. I was nowhere to be seen because I'd left early. The caption read, "So grateful for these amazing friends who are standing with me tomorrow." Not family and friends, just friends. The message was clear. Amanda had posted a photo of herself and Jessica with the caption, "Maid of honor duties begin now. So excited to stand beside this beautiful bride tomorrow." The comments were full of heart emojis and congratulations, with several people expressing how sweet their friendship was. No one questioned why the bride's sister wasn't in the maid of honor role because most of these online friends didn't even know Jessica had a sister. I closed the laptop and decided to take a bath, hoping the hot water might help me relax enough to sleep. Tomorrow was going to be a long day, and I needed to find a way to get through it with grace and dignity, even if I felt like I'd been relegated to the role of wedding guest rather than beloved sister. As I sank into the hot water, I tried to convince myself that maybe I was reading too much into everything. Maybe Jessica was just stressed and not thinking clearly. Maybe after the wedding, when the pressure was off, we could talk about what had happened and clear the air. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about wedding stress or poor planning. This felt intentional. Jessica had made deliberate choices about how to position me in her wedding, and those choices reflected how she really saw our relationship. I was useful for planning and paying, but I wasn't important enough to honor. I was family by blood, but not family in her heart. The water started to cool, and I realized I'd been soaking for nearly an hour, lost in my thoughts. I climbed out of the tub, wrapped myself in the hotel's plush robe, and tried to prepare mentally for tomorrow. Whatever was happening between Jessica and me, I wasn't going to let it ruin her wedding day. I would walk down that aisle alone with my head held high. I would smile for the photos, and I would celebrate their marriage with genuine happiness. But after tomorrow, things were going to change between us. I was done being taken for granted, and I was definitely done funding someone else's dream while being treated like an inconvenience. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I made a mental note to have a serious conversation with Jessica after the honeymoon. It was time for us to establish some new boundaries in our relationship, and I had a feeling that conversation was going to be long overdue. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October sunshine that makes Portland look like a postcard. I woke up feeling surprisingly rested despite everything that had happened the night before. There's something about making a decision, even a difficult one, that brings a certain peace. I'd spent months walking on eggshells around Jessica, trying to be the perfect supportive sister, but that version of myself was exhausted. Today, I was going to show up as authentically as possible and let the consequences unfold naturally. I ordered room service for breakfast, something I never would have done normally because of the expense, but today felt like a day for small rebellions. As I sat by the window eating fresh berries and perfectly prepared eggs Benedict, I watched the city wake up below me. People were walking their dogs along the waterfront, joggers were making their way through the park, and life was continuing on as normal for everyone who wasn't dealing with family drama at a wedding. I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Something about the ribbon color being wrong and the heights being different than what we ordered? I don't know. I wasn't really listening to all the details. Can you just go fix it? Please? The old Sarah would have immediately said yes, would have dropped everything to solve Jessica's problem and ensure her day went perfectly. but looking at my sister standing in my doorway, demanding my help while offering no acknowledgement of how she'd treated me, I felt something shift inside me. "Actually, Jessica, I can't," I said calmly. "I need to finish getting ready, and then I promised Maya I'd help her with something before the ceremony. Maybe Amanda could handle it, since she's your maid of honor and all." Jessica's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, irritation, and finally something that looked like panic. "But Amanda doesn't know the vendors. She doesn't know what we ordered." "Then maybe you should go yourself," I suggested. "It's your wedding, and you know your vision better than anyone." "Sarah, please. I'm getting my hair done in an hour, and I can't deal with vendor drama right now. You're so much better at this stuff than I am." There it was. I was better at handling problems, better at managing details, better at dealing with difficult people. But I wasn't important enough to stand beside her as maid of honor. I wasn't valued enough to walk with a partner or sit with the wedding party. I was useful, but I wasn't honored. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you today," I said firmly. "You'll need to figure out another solution." Jessica stared at me like I'd slapped her. In all our years of being sisters, I'd never refused to help her when she asked. I'd never prioritized my own needs over solving her problems, but today was different. Today, I was choosing myself. "Fine," she said tightly. "I guess I'll have to handle it myself." "Good luck," I said, and I meant it. I wanted her wedding to go well. I just wasn't going to sacrifice my own dignity to make it happen. After Jessica left, I sat back down on the couch and took a deep breath. Setting that boundary had been harder than I expected, but it also felt liberating. For the first time in months, I'd put my own needs first, instead of automatically accommodating Jessica's demands. By 3 o'clock, the hotel chapel was filled with guests, and the wedding party was assembled in the small staging area behind the altar. The flowers looked perfect, so apparently Jessica had managed to resolve whatever crisis had arisen with the florist. I didn't ask her about it, and she didn't volunteer any information. We maintained polite distance while the photographer took pre-ceremony photos of the bridesmaids. Amanda was fussing over Jessica's dress and veil, playing her maid of honor, roll to the hilt. She kept making comments about how beautiful Jessica looked and how perfect everything was going to be. Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, but I couldn't help wondering if she understood that she'd been chosen over the bride's sister, and if so, whether that made her uncomfortable. The other bridesmaids were chatting nervously about the ceremony timing and their responsibilities. Kelly, who was Jessica's co-worker, kept checking her phone for messages from the groomsmen. Morgan and Stephanie, friends from Jessica's yoga class, were comparing notes about the reception playlist and speculating about which guests might give the most entertaining speeches. I stood slightly apart from the group, not by choice, but because that seemed to be my assigned position in the wedding party dynamics. When the photographer asked for group shots, I was consistently positioned at the edge of the frame. When Patricia, the coordinator, gave final instructions, she directed most of her comments to Amanda as the maid of honor. I was present but peripheral, which seemed to be the theme of my entire wedding experience. At 3:20, Patricia gathered us for final lineup instructions. "Remember, groomsmen enter from the side door and take their positions. Then bridesmaids process down the aisle in order, followed by the maid of honor, and finally our beautiful bride with her father." I noticed she didn't mention my solo walk specifically, probably because it was unusual enough to be awkward. The other bridesmaids were paired with groomsmen as escort partners, chatting quietly with their assigned walking companions about pace and timing. I stood alone, checking my phone and trying to look casual about my partnerless status. "Sarah?" Patricia said, approaching me with her clipboard. "You'll count to 10 after Stephanie and Chris begin walking, then follow them down the aisle. Take your time, and remember to smile. You'll look beautiful." Her kindness was unexpected, and I appreciated that she was trying to make my solo walk feel intentional rather than awkward. "Thank you," I said. "I'll do my best to make it look graceful." "Just be yourself," she said with a warm smile. "Confidence is always beautiful." The music began, signaling the start of the processional. I watched through the slightly open chapel doors as the groomsmen took their positions at the altar. Michael looked handsome and nervous in his charcoal gray suit, fidgeting with his tie as he waited for his bride to appear. His best man, David, gave him an encouraging pat on the shoulder and whispered something that made Michael smile. Then it was time for the bridesmaids to begin their walk. Amanda went first, processing slowly down the aisle with David as her escort. She looked radiant in her emerald dress, beaming at the assembled guests and clearly enjoying her moment in the spotlight. Kelly and Ryan followed, then Morgan and James, and finally Stephanie and Chris. Each pair walked with practiced timing, smiling at family and friends as they made their way to the altar, and then it was my turn. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped into the chapel doorway. The afternoon sunlight was streaming through the tall windows, casting everything in golden light. The guests turned to look at me, and for a moment, I felt self-conscious about walking alone when everyone else had been paired. But then I remembered Patricia's words about confidence being beautiful, and I lifted my chin and began my walk. Something unexpected happened as I made my way down the aisle. Instead of feeling embarrassed or diminished by my solo status, I felt elegant and self-possessed. I wasn't hurrying to keep pace with a partner or worrying about coordinating with someone else's steps. I could take my time, acknowledge guests with genuine smiles, and simply be present in the moment. I could see Michael at the altar, and he gave me a warm smile and small wave as I approached. David, his best man, also nodded at me with obvious fondness. These were people who knew my role in bringing Jessica and Michael together, who understood my importance in their relationship story. Their recognition felt good after a day of being treated as peripheral. As I took my position at the far end of the bridesmaids' lineup, Amanda processed down the aisle as maid of honor. She looked beautiful and confident, waving at guests and clearly savoring her role. When she reached the altar, she took her place next to where Jessica would stand, adjusting her bouquet and preparing for her moment to shine. Then the music changed to the traditional wedding march, and Jessica appeared at the back of the chapel with our father. She looked absolutely stunning in her ivory silk gown, her veil trailing behind her as she began her walk toward Michael. Our father looked proud and emotional, clearly treasuring this moment of giving his daughter away. The ceremony itself was beautiful and heartfelt. Jessica and Michael had written their own vows, and listening to them promised to love and support each other through life's challenges reminded me why I'd been so happy to introduce them in the first place. They were genuinely good together, complementing each other's strengths and bringing out the best in each other. During the vow exchange, I found myself getting emotional despite everything that had happened over the past 24 hours. This was my sister marrying a man I cared about, creating a new family unit that would hopefully bring them both happiness for decades to come. My feelings about how I'd been treated didn't diminish my genuine love for both of them, or my hope for their future together. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the chapel erupted in applause and cheers. Jessica and Michael kissed with obvious joy, then turned to face their guests as a married couple. They looked radiant together, and I felt a genuine surge of happiness for them despite the complicated emotions I was navigating. The recessional began with Jessica and Michael walking back down the aisle together, beaming at their guests and clearly high on the excitement of being newlyweds. Amanda followed as maid of honor, walking with David as best man. Then the other bridesmaids processed out with their groomsmen partners, chatting excitedly about the ceremony and the reception to come. Once again, I walked alone, but this time it felt different. Instead of being embarrassed about my solo status, I felt poised and dignified. I took my time, smiled genuinely at guests, and carried myself with confidence. Several people commented later that I'd looked beautiful and elegant walking down the aisle, and I realized that my solo walk had actually made me stand out in a positive way. The cocktail hour was held in the hotel's garden terrace, a beautiful outdoor space overlooking the river. The October weather was perfect, crisp but not cold, with just enough breeze to make the string lights dance in the trees. Jessica and Michael were taking photos with the wedding party while guests enjoyed appetizers and drinks, so I had some time to mingle and catch up with family members I hadn't seen in months. I was talking with my Uncle Robert about his recent retirement when Michael's college roommate Jake approached me with a confused expression. Jake had been a groomsman and was one of the people I'd gotten to know during the various wedding events over the past year. "Hey, Sarah," he said. "Can I ask you something kind of personal?" "Sure," I replied, curious about what was on his mind. "Why aren't you Michael's best woman? I mean, you're the one who introduced them, right? And you've been super involved in all the wedding planning. It seems weird that you're not standing up there with him." The question caught me off guard, partly because it was so direct, and partly because it hadn't occurred to me that Michael's friends might have expected me to be in his wedding party rather than Jessica's. "I'm Jessica's sister," I said slowly. "I'm supposed to be on her side." "Yeah, but traditionally the best man or woman is someone really important to the groom, right? Michael talks about you all the time. He's always saying how grateful he is that you introduced them and how much he values your friendship. I just assumed you'd be standing with him." I felt a strange flutter in my chest as Jake's words sank in. Had Michael wanted me as his best woman? Had Jessica somehow prevented that from happening? The idea seemed far-fetched, but given everything that had transpired over the past day, I was beginning to question assumptions I'd made about the wedding planning process. "Did Michael ever mention wanting me in his wedding party?" I asked, carefully. Jake nodded immediately. "Oh yeah, months ago. He said he was going to ask you to be his best woman because of your role in getting them together, but then I guess the plans changed or something." Before I could process this information fully, Maya appeared at my elbow with a glass of champagne and a concerned expression. "Sarah, you need to see this," she said quietly, showing me her phone screen. She'd pulled up Jessica's Instagram account, which featured a new post from about an hour ago. It was a photo of Jessica and the wedding party taken before the ceremony, with all the bridesmaids gathered around her in their emerald dresses. The caption read, "So grateful for these amazing women who are standing with me on my special day. Love my girls." The photo was beautiful, and everyone looked radiant in their dresses and professional makeup. But something was wrong with it. I stared at the image for several seconds before I realized what was bothering me. I wasn't in the photo. Despite being part of the wedding party, despite wearing the same dress and participating in the same pre-ceremony preparations, I had somehow been excluded from this official wedding party photograph. "When was this taken?" I asked Maya, my voice carefully controlled. "While you were in the bathroom touching up your lipstick," Maya said gently. "I saw the photographer arranging them for the shot, but I didn't realize you weren't included until I saw the post." I handed Maya back her phone and took a sip of champagne, using the moment to collect my thoughts. This wasn't an accidental oversight. You don't accidentally exclude the bride's sister from the official wedding party photo. This was a deliberate choice, another way of minimizing my presence and importance in Jessica's wedding narrative. "She's rewriting history," I said quietly. "She's creating a version of her wedding day where I'm not really part of the story." Maya nodded grimly. "And posting it on social media makes it the official record. Anyone who looks at her wedding photos in the future will see her with her girls and assume that's the complete wedding party." The realization hit me like a weight in my chest. This wasn't just about wedding day slights or poor planning. Jessica was actively working to erase my significance from her wedding story. She wanted my help with logistics and my money for expenses, but she didn't want me prominently featured in the memories or the photographs. "Sarah!" a voice called from across the terrace. I turned to see Michael approaching with a huge smile, still glowing from the ceremony high. He looked handsome and happy, and I felt a genuine surge of affection for him despite everything else that was happening. "You looked beautiful walking down that aisle," he said, giving me a warm hug. "Thank you for everything you've done to make this day possible. Jessica told me you've been amazing with all the planning and coordination." The irony of his gratitude wasn't lost on me. Michael was acknowledging my contributions, while Jessica was systematically erasing them from the official record. "I'm just happy you two are married," I said honestly. "You're perfect together." "We are, aren't we?" he said with the kind of goofy grin that only newly married people can pull off. "And it's all thanks to you introducing us. I was just telling David earlier that you should have been my best woman since you're the reason we're here." There it was again. The suggestion that I should have been in Michael's wedding party instead of relegated to the back of Jessica's. "Jake mentioned something similar," I said carefully. "Did you consider asking me to stand with you?" Michael's expression shifted slightly, becoming more serious. "Actually, I did more than consider it. I specifically asked Jessica if you could be my best woman, since you're the one who brought us together and you've become such a good friend over the years." My heart started beating faster. "What did she say?" "She said you really wanted to be a bridesmaid instead, that you'd feel weird standing on the groom's side. She said it was important to you to fulfill the traditional sister role." Michael paused, studying my face. "But honestly, Sarah, you don't look like someone who insisted on traditional roles. You look like someone who would have been honored to stand wherever you were most wanted." The conversation was interrupted by Patricia announcing that dinner was ready and asking guests to find their assigned tables. Michael squeezed my shoulder and headed off to find Jessica for their grand entrance as a married couple. I stood there for a moment, processing what he'd just told me. Jessica had lied. Not just to me, but to Michael. She'd told him I preferred to be a bridesmaid while telling me the wedding party was already set. She'd prevented me from having the honored role Michael had wanted to give me, then positioned me as the least important bridesmaid in her own party. It was manipulation on multiple levels, designed to keep me peripheral while maintaining plausible deniability about her motives. Maya appeared beside me again, having witnessed the conversation with Michael. "Did I hear correctly that he wanted you as his best woman?" she asked. "Apparently," I said, my voice tight with controlled anger. "And apparently Jessica told him I preferred being a bridesmaid." "That's some serious manipulation," Maya said bluntly. "She kept you from the role you deserved while making it look like it was your choice." We found our assigned table, which turned out to be near the back of the reception space with various extended family members and family friends. Maya had been seated with us, probably because she was close to my age, and the planners thought we'd enjoy each other's company. The wedding party table was prominently positioned near the front of the room, close to the sweetheart table where Jessica and Michael would be dining. As we settled in for dinner, I watched Jessica and Michael make their grand entrance as husband and wife. They looked radiant and happy, dancing their way into the reception to enthusiastic applause from their guests. Whatever problems existed between Jessica and me, there was no denying that she and Michael were genuinely in love and excited about their future together. But as the evening progressed, I found myself paying attention to details I might have missed otherwise. When the best man gave his speech, he talked about Michael's bachelor party and his friendship with the groom, but he also mentioned how grateful Michael was to have found Jessica through a mutual friend. No mention of my name or my specific role in their meeting. When Amanda gave her maid of honor speech, she talked about Jessica's beauty, her kindness, and her excitement about married life. She shared memories from their college days and expressed her honor at being chosen for such an important role. Again, no acknowledgement of how Jessica and Michael had actually met or who had facilitated their relationship. It was a systematic erasure of my significance, carried out with enough subtlety that most guests probably didn't notice anything unusual. But for someone who knew the real story, the omissions were glaring and obviously intentional. After dinner, during the dancing portion of the reception, I excused myself and went to the ladies' room to collect my thoughts and decide how to handle the rest of the evening. I'd maintained my composure throughout the ceremony and dinner, but the accumulated weight of being marginalized and lied about was becoming harder to bear gracefully. As I was touching up my lipstick, Amanda entered the bathroom looking slightly flustered. She'd had several glasses of wine during dinner and was in that phase of wedding celebration where people become more emotional and talkative than usual. "Sarah," she said with obvious relief, "I'm so glad I ran into you. I've been wanting to talk to you all day." "Oh?" I said, keeping my tone neutral. "What about?" "This whole maid of honor thing," she said, lowering her voice even though we were alone. "I have to be honest, it's been really weird for me. I mean, I was honored when Jessica asked, but I kept expecting her to change her mind and ask you instead." I stopped applying lipstick and looked at her directly. "Why would you think that?" "Because you're her sister," Amanda said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "And because you're the one who's been doing all the actual maid of honor duties. You planned the bachelorette party, you coordinated with vendors, you've been managing all the logistics. I've basically just been showing up and looking pretty in photos." Her honesty was refreshing after a day of careful positioning and strategic omissions. "Did Jessica ever explain why she chose you over me?" I asked. Amanda nodded, then hesitated as if she wasn't sure she should share what she'd been told. "She said that you two had grown apart over the past year, and that she wanted someone who really understood her current life phase. She said you were great with planning stuff, but that she needed emotional support from someone who got her better." The explanation stung, partly because it was so far from my perception of our relationship, and partly because it positioned me as competent, but not emotionally connected. It was another way of minimizing my importance while justifying my exclusion from the inner circle. "That's interesting," I said carefully. "Did she mention that Michael wanted me to be his best woman?" Amanda's eyes widened. "What?" "No, she definitely didn't mention that." "Michael wanted you in his wedding party?" "Apparently. He told me tonight that he specifically asked Jessica if I could stand with him, since I'm the one who introduced them. She told him I preferred being a bridesmaid." Amanda stared at me for several seconds, processing this information. I could see her mentally reviewing conversations she'd had with Jessica and trying to fit this new information into the narrative she'd been given. "That's really manipulative," she said finally. "She kept you from the role you should have had while making it seem like you chose to be sidelined." "It appears that way," I agreed. Amanda leaned against the bathroom counter looking troubled. "Sarah, I'm really sorry. If I'd known any of this, I would never have accepted the maid of honor role. It's not right." Her apology was genuine, and I appreciated it even though none of this was her fault. "You didn't know," I said. "Jessica presented you with an opportunity and you accepted it. There's nothing wrong with that." "But there is something wrong with how she handled it," Amanda said firmly. "And honestly, it explains why today has felt so strange. I kept feeling like I was playing a role instead of genuinely supporting my friend, and now I know why. She didn't choose me because of our relationship. She chose me to avoid honoring yours." We returned to the reception together, but something had shifted in the dynamic. Amanda now knew that she'd been used as a tool in Jessica's manipulation, and I could see that knowledge bothering her as she watched Jessica work the room as the radiant bride. I decided to enjoy the rest of the reception on my own terms. I danced with my Uncle Robert and several of Michael's friends who asked me to join them on the dance floor. I chatted with guests who knew me and appreciated my role in bringing the couple together. I celebrated Jessica and Michael's marriage genuinely while refusing to pretend that everything was fine between my sister and me. Around 10 o'clock, as the reception was winding down, Michael approached me again. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, looking relaxed and happy after hours of celebration. "Sarah, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. "Privately?" We stepped out onto the terrace, where the evening air was cool and refreshing after the warmth of the reception hall. The city lights were twinkling across the river, and the setting felt peaceful despite the emotional complexity of the day. "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier," Michael said. "About me wanting you as my best woman. And I have to ask, did you really tell Jessica you preferred being a bridesmaid?" I looked at him directly, this man I'd come to care about as a friend over the past 3 years, and decided to tell him the truth. "No, Michael, I didn't. I was never given the option to stand with you. Jessica told me the wedding party was already set, and I assumed that meant you'd chosen your friends." His face went through several expressions as he processed this information. Confusion, disappointment, and then something that looked like anger. "She lied to both of us," he said quietly. "It appears that way," I agreed. Michael was quiet. For several minutes, staring out at the river and clearly thinking through the implications of what he'd learned. "This changes how I understand a lot of things that have happened during the wedding planning," he said finally. "There were several times when Jessica made decisions that seemed designed to minimize your involvement, and when I questioned her about it, she always had explanations that made me feel like I was being oversensitive." "What kind of decisions?" I asked, curious about his perspective on the process. "Like not including you in the engagement photo session, even though you're family. Or not asking you to give a speech tonight, even though you're the reason we met. Or seating you with extended family instead of at the wedding party table. Every time I brought up including you more prominently, she had reasons why it wouldn't work, or why you wouldn't want it." The pattern he was describing made perfect sense, and confirmed my growing understanding of how systematically I'd been marginalized. Jessica had been managing both Michael's expectations and mine, keeping us from comparing notes while she orchestrated my exclusion from important moments. "I'm sorry this happened," Michael said sincerely. "You deserved better from both of us, but especially from Jessica. You've been nothing but supportive and generous, and you should have been honored, not sidelined." His acknowledgement meant more to me than I expected. After a day of feeling invisible and unimportant, having someone recognize my contributions and validate my feelings was emotionally powerful. "Thank you for saying that," I told him. "It means a lot." "What are you going to do?" he asked. "About your relationship with Jessica, I mean." It was a good question, and one I'd been considering throughout the day. "I'm going to take some time to think about what kind of relationship I want with her going forward," I said. "Today has shown me that we have very different ideas about family loyalty and respect. I need to decide how to protect myself while still being open to rebuilding if she's willing to acknowledge what happened and make changes." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "I hope you two can work it out. But I also hope you know that regardless of what happens between you and Jessica, you'll always be important to me. You're the reason I found the love of my life, and I'll never forget that." We hugged goodbye, and I watched him return to the reception to find his new wife. Despite everything that had happened, I felt genuine happiness for their marriage and hope for their future together. My problems were with Jessica's choices, not with their relationship as a couple. As I prepared to leave the reception and return to my room, I realized that today had been a turning point in my understanding of myself and my family relationships. I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd thought, more capable of standing up for myself than I'd believed. I'd also learned that I couldn't control how other people chose to treat me, but I could control how I responded to that treatment. Tomorrow, Jessica and Michael would leave for their honeymoon in Hawaii, and I would return to my regular life in Portland. But the conversations that needed to happen between Jessica and me would have to wait until they returned. I had 2 weeks to decide exactly what I wanted to say and how I wanted to move forward. One thing was certain: I was done being taken for granted, and I was done accepting treatment that didn't match my worth. Whatever our relationship looked like going forward, it was going to be based on mutual respect and honest communication, or it wasn't going to exist at all. The morning after the wedding, I woke up feeling different than I had in months. There was a clarity in my mind that hadn't been there before, a sense of purpose that came from finally understanding the true dynamics of my relationship with Jessica. I ordered coffee from room service and sat by the window, watching Portland wake up while I processed everything that had happened over the past 48 hours. My phone had several missed calls from Jessica, which surprised me since she was supposed to be preparing for her honeymoon departure later that afternoon. There were also a few text messages, each one more frantic than the last. The first one, sent at 7 in the morning, simply said, "Call me when you wake up." The second, sent an hour later, said, "Sarah, I really need to talk to you before we leave for Hawaii." The third, sent just 20 minutes ago, said, "Please don't ignore me. Something happened and I need your help." For a moment, I felt the familiar pull to respond immediately, to drop everything and solve whatever crisis Jessica was facing. It was a pattern that had defined our relationship for years. Jessica would encounter a problem, reach out to me for help, and I would rearrange my schedule to accommodate her needs. But today, that impulse felt different. Instead of automatically responding, I found myself questioning whether her emergency was really my responsibility. I decided to finish my coffee and take a shower before deciding how to respond. For the first time in our relationship, Jessica's timeline was not automatically my priority. If she needed help, she could wait until I was ready to offer it, and she could ask for it respectfully rather than demanding it as if it were my obligation. The shower felt luxurious and restorative. I took my time with the hotel's expensive shampoo and body wash, enjoying the sensation of hot water and the knowledge that I had nowhere else I needed to be. When I finally emerged, wrapped in the plush hotel robe, I felt centered and calm in a way that had been elusive during the chaotic wedding weekend. I decided to call Maya before responding to Jessica. Maya had returned to her own hotel room the night before, but I knew she'd be interested in hearing about my conversation with Michael and how I was feeling about everything in the light of day. "I was hoping you'd call," Maya said when she picked up. "How are you holding up after yesterday?" "Surprisingly well," I said honestly. "I think having everything out in the open, knowing the truth about what really happened, has actually been liberating. I'm not questioning my own perceptions anymore." Maya made a sympathetic sound. "It's always easier to deal with reality than to wonder if you're imagining things. Did you decide what you want to say to Jessica when you talk to her?" "That's the thing," I said. "I'm not sure I want to talk to her right now. She's been calling and texting all morning asking for help with something, and for the first time in my life, I don't feel compelled to immediately solve her problems." "Good for you," Maya said firmly. "She spent the last 2 days showing you exactly how much she values your relationship. Maybe it's time for her to experience what it feels like when you're not available to fix everything for her." We talked for another 20 minutes about the wedding, about family dynamics, and about the importance of setting boundaries with people who take advantage of your generosity. Maya's perspective was grounding and helpful, reminding me that my feelings were valid and that I had every right to protect my own emotional well-being. After we hung up, I decided to treat myself to a proper breakfast at the hotel restaurant rather than staying in my room. I dressed carefully in a comfortable but elegant outfit, applied makeup that made me feel confident, and headed downstairs to the dining room. If Jessica wanted to reach me, she could continue trying. I was going to enjoy my morning at my own pace. The restaurant had a lovely view of the river, and I requested a table by the window where I could watch the boats and enjoy the October sunshine. I ordered eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, and really good coffee, then settled in to read the news on my phone and simply exist without anyone else's drama intruding on my peace. Halfway through breakfast, my phone rang again. This time it was Michael, calling, which was unexpected since he should have been preparing for their departure to Hawaii. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to answer since my issues were with Jessica, not with him. "Sarah, thank you for picking up," Michael said, and his voice sounded strained in a way that made me immediately concerned. "I'm sorry to bother you, but Jessica is having some kind of meltdown and she insists she needs to talk to you before we can leave for our honeymoon." "What kind of meltdown?" I asked, curious despite myself. "I'm not entirely sure," Michael admitted. "She was fine when we went to bed last night, but she woke up this morning in a panic about something. She keeps saying she needs to fix things with you before we leave, but she won't tell me what specifically needs to be fixed. She's been crying for 2 hours and refuses to finish packing." I felt a familiar stirring of concern, the automatic response that had governed my relationship with Jessica for decades. But I also felt something new, a protective instinct directed toward myself rather than toward her. Whatever crisis Jessica was experiencing, it wasn't my responsibility to manage her emotions or solve her problems, especially not after how she'd treated me. "Michael," I said gently, "I appreciate you calling, but Jessica's emotional state isn't something I can fix for you. If she wants to talk to me, she can call me herself and ask respectfully. But I'm not going to drop everything and rush over there just because she's upset." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Michael spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "You know what? You're absolutely right. I'm sorry for calling. I think I've gotten used to the pattern of Jessica having a crisis and you solving it, but that's not fair to you." "It's not fair to either of us," I agreed. "Jessica needs to learn how to manage her own emotions and communicate directly about what she needs. And you need to be able to comfort your wife without bringing in outside help." "You're right," Michael said. "I'm going to go back in there and tell Jessica that if she wants to talk to you, she needs to call you herself and have an adult conversation." Thank you for the perspective. After we hung up, I sat with my coffee and reflected on how different that conversation had felt from the usual dynamic. Instead of immediately agreeing to help, I'd maintained my boundaries and suggested healthier alternatives. Instead of feeling guilty about not solving the problem, I felt proud of myself for refusing to be manipulated. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Jessica, and her voice was tear-filled and shaky when I answered. "Sarah, please don't hang up," she said before I could even say hello. "I know you're angry with me, and I know I messed up this weekend, but I really need to talk to you before Michael and I leave for Hawaii." "I'm listening," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I realized that I made some really bad decisions about the wedding planning. I was so focused on having everything be perfect that I lost sight of what was really important. It was a start, but it was also vague enough to be meaningless." "Can you be more specific about what decisions you think were bad?" I asked. Jessica was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her crying softly. "The whole thing with you walking alone and not being maid of honor and sitting with the extended family. I know it must have hurt your feelings, and I'm sorry about that." "Jessica," I said carefully, "those weren't just decisions that hurt my feelings. Those were deliberate choices to exclude me from important roles in your wedding while still expecting me to contribute financially and logistically. And according to Michael, you lied to both of us about his request for me to be his best woman." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. Finally, she spoke again, her voice very small. "I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared that if you were too involved, too prominent, people would pay more attention to you than to me. You're so good at everything, Sarah. You're successful and confident, and everyone always loves you. I was terrified that even on my wedding day, you would somehow overshadow me." The honesty was unexpected, and it gave me some insight into Jessica's motivations that I hadn't considered before. But it also revealed a level of insecurity and competitiveness that was troubling, especially when directed at her own sister. "So you decided to marginalize me instead of dealing with your own insecurities?" I asked. "I know it was wrong," Jessica said quickly. "I know it was selfish and hurtful and stupid. But I was so afraid that my wedding wouldn't feel like it. It was really mine if you were too involved. Jessica, I'm your sister. I love you and I want good things for you. The idea that I would somehow sabotage your wedding or steal attention from you is deeply hurtful. I've spent years supporting your goals and celebrating your successes. I know," she whispered. "I know you have. And I know I've been taking that for granted. I've been taking you for granted." It was the closest thing to a real apology I'd heard from her, but it still felt incomplete. "What about the lies you told Michael about me not wanting to be his best woman?" I asked. Another long pause. I panicked when he suggested it. I knew he was right, that you deserved that honor because you brought us together. But I couldn't stand the idea of you being the center of attention during the ceremony. So I told him you preferred being a bridesmaid, and I told you the wedding party was already set. I thought it would be easier than having to explain my feelings. "Easier for you," I corrected. "It wasn't easier for me or for Michael. It was manipulative and dishonest." "You're right," Jessica said, and she sounded genuinely ashamed. "I manipulated both of you because I was too immature to deal with my own jealousy and insecurity. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry for lying, and I'm sorry for excluding you, and I'm sorry for taking advantage of your generosity." The apology felt more genuine than anything else she'd said, but I still wasn't sure what she expected from me in response. "I appreciate you apologizing," I said. "But Jessica, this weekend has shown me that we have very different ideas about family loyalty and respect. I need some time to think about what our relationship looks like going forward." "Please don't say that," Jessica said, her voice becoming panicked again. "I can't go on my honeymoon knowing that I might have ruined things between us forever. Can't we just go back to how things were before?" "No," I said firmly. "We can't go back because how things were before involved me consistently prioritizing your needs over my own boundaries and self-respect. I'm not willing to do that anymore." "Then what do you want from me?" Jessica asked, and there was a note of frustration in her voice that revealed her true feelings about having to account for her behavior. "I want you to think seriously about why you felt the need to exclude and lie to people who love you," I said. "I want you to consider getting some help for the insecurity and competitiveness that led to this situation. And I want you to understand that if we're going to have a relationship going forward, it needs to be based on mutual respect and honest communication. And if I do those things," Jessica asked, "then maybe we can rebuild something healthier than what we had before. But Jessica, I'm not promising anything right now. You've shown me that you're capable of being deliberately hurtful and manipulative when it serves your purposes. I need to see real change, not just apologies." We talked for a few more minutes, but the conversation felt like it had reached its natural conclusion. Jessica promised to think about what I'd said, and I promised to consider talking again after she returned from her honeymoon. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a starting point for potentially addressing the problems in our relationship. After we hung up, I sat in the restaurant for another hour, processing the conversation and thinking about what I wanted my life to look like going forward. The weekend had been painful, but it had also been clarifying. I now understood exactly how Jessica saw our relationship, and I could make informed decisions about how much of myself I was willing to invest in fixing it. When I returned to my room after breakfast, I decided to spend some time on social media to see how the wedding was being portrayed online. I was curious about the narrative that was being constructed and whether the version Jessica was sharing matched the reality I'd experienced. Jessica's Instagram account had been updated with several new posts from the wedding. There were beautiful photos of her and Michael during the ceremony, looking radiant and happy as they exchanged vows. There were pictures of the reception, showing guests dancing and celebrating, and there were multiple photos of the wedding party, all featuring the bridesmaids and groomsmen in their elegant attire. What was notable was how I appeared in these photos, or more accurately, how I didn't appear in many of them. In the group shots where I was included, I was consistently positioned at the edge of the frame, sometimes partially cut off or obscured by other people. The photos that featured the most prominent placement were ones that didn't include me at all. The captions were also telling. Jessica's posts referred to her amazing bridesmaids and her incredible wedding party, but there were no individual tags or mentions that would identify specific people's contributions. It was a generic celebration that could have applied to any wedding party, with no acknowledgement of the unique roles different people had played. I scrolled through the comments, reading the responses from friends and family members. Most were standard congratulatory messages, but a few caught my attention. Several people had asked where I was in certain photos, noting that they expected to see the bride's sister more prominently featured. A couple of Michael's friends had commented asking why I wasn't standing with him, since they knew I'd introduced the couple. Jessica had responded to these comments with vague explanations about photo timing and logistics, but her responses felt defensive and incomplete. It was clear that some people were noticing the inconsistencies between their expectations and what they were seeing in the wedding coverage. I decided to share some of my own photos from the weekend, not to compete with Jessica's narrative, but to create my own record of the experience. I posted a beautiful photo of myself walking down the aisle alone, looking confident and elegant in my emerald dress. The caption was simple. Sometimes walking alone means walking with dignity. The response to my post was immediate and overwhelming. Friends and family members who hadn't been at the wedding commented on how beautiful I looked and how poised I appeared. Several people asked about the significance of the caption, sensing that there was more to the story than what was visible in the photo. More interestingly, people who had been at the wedding began sharing their own observations. My cousin Maya commented that I'd been the most elegant member of the wedding party, walking with grace and confidence that had been notable to everyone present. Michael's college friend Jake commented that I'd looked stunning and that everyone had been talking about my dignified presence during the ceremony. Within a few hours, my post had received more engagement than any social media content I'd ever shared. People were resharing it with comments about the importance of self-respect and the beauty of confident independence. The photo and caption seemed to resonate with people who had their own experiences with feeling undervalued or excluded from important events. The contrast between my post and Jessica's posts was becoming apparent to anyone who looked at both accounts. While Jessica's photos showed a traditional wedding party celebration, my photo told a different story about strength and dignity in the face of exclusion. People began connecting the dots, understanding that something had happened that wasn't being directly addressed. By evening, several family members had reached out to me privately asking what had really happened during the wedding planning. I answered their questions honestly but diplomatically, explaining that Jessica and I had different ideas about family roles and that I'd chosen to focus on celebrating her marriage rather than creating drama about the logistics. The conversations were validating because they confirmed that other people had noticed the unusual dynamics and were concerned about how I'd been treated. I wasn't imagining the slights or being oversensitive about the exclusions. The behavior had been obvious, enough that multiple family members were reaching out to check on my well-being. 3 days after Jessica and Michael left for Hawaii, I received an unexpected phone call from Amanda. She sounded upset and wanted to meet for coffee to discuss something that had been bothering her since the wedding. We arranged to meet at a cafe near my apartment that afternoon. Amanda arrived looking troubled and immediately launched into an explanation of why she'd wanted to see me. "Sarah, I've been thinking constantly about our conversation in the bathroom at the reception, and I've realized that I was part of something really wrong without understanding what was happening." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I suspected I knew where this conversation was heading. The whole maid of honor thing, Amanda said. I've been replaying everything Jessica told me about why she chose me, and now that I know the truth about Michael wanting you as his best woman, I understand that she was using me to keep you marginalized. I appreciated Amanda's honesty and her willingness to examine her role in the situation. You didn't know, I said. Jessica presented you with an opportunity, and you had no reason to question her motives. But I should have questioned it, Amanda insisted. I should have wondered why she was choosing her sorority sister over her own sister for the most important role in her wedding. I was flattered by the attention and didn't think critically about what was really happening. Amanda went on to explain that she'd been feeling increasingly uncomfortable since the wedding, as she'd had time to process the dynamics she'd witnessed. She'd noticed how Jessica had excluded me from photos and conversations, how I'd been seated away from the wedding party, and how the speeches had failed to acknowledge my role in bringing the couple together. The more I think about it, the more I realize that Jessica was deliberately creating a version of her wedding where you weren't important, Amanda said, and she used me to make that version seem legitimate. We talked for over an hour about the wedding planning process, the dynamics between Jessica and me, and Amanda's growing understanding of how she'd been manipulated into participating in my exclusion. She was genuinely upset about her role in the situation and wanted to find a way to address it. I think I need to have a conversation with Jessica when she gets back from her honeymoon, Amanda said. I can't pretend that everything was fine when I know that it wasn't. That's up to you, I said. But Amanda, don't feel like you need to fix this situation for me. Jessica and I have our own issues to work through, and that's not your responsibility. But I was part of the problem, Amanda insisted. Even if I didn't understand what was happening at the time, I benefited from Jessica's decision to exclude you. I think I owe it to you to speak up about what I know. I appreciated Amanda's integrity and her willingness to confront an uncomfortable truth about her participation in the wedding dynamics. Her perspective was also valuable because she'd been positioned as the insider while I'd been positioned as the outsider, so she'd seen aspects of Jessica's behavior that I hadn't witnessed. Directly. 2 days later, I received another unexpected call, this time from Patricia, the wedding coordinator. She apologized for reaching out after the event was over, but explained that she had some concerns about the wedding planning process that she felt needed to be addressed. Sarah, I've been coordinating weddings for 15 years, and I've never seen a family dynamic quite like what I witnessed at Jessica's wedding, Patricia said. The way you were excluded from important moments and positioned as peripheral to the celebration was highly unusual and frankly unprofessional on the bride's part. Patricia went on to explain that she'd been bothered by several aspects of the wedding logistics that hadn't made sense at the time. The decision to have me walk alone when there were equal numbers of bridesmaids and groomsmen had been presented as the bride's preference, but Patricia had found it unusual enough to question. I've also learned since the wedding that you were the one who introduced the couple and contributed significantly to the wedding expenses, Patricia said. That information makes the exclusion even more troubling. You should have been honored as a VIP family member, not treated as an afterthought. Patricia's professional perspective was validating because it confirmed that the treatment I'd received wasn't just personally hurtful, but also objectively inappropriate according to wedding industry standards. She'd worked with hundreds of families and had never seen a bride deliberately marginalize a sister who had been so instrumental in making the wedding possible. I'm calling because I want you to know that your dignity and grace throughout the weekend were noticed and appreciated, Patricia said. You handled a difficult situation with more class than many people would have managed, and I wanted to acknowledge that. A week after Jessica and Michael left for Hawaii, I received a call from my bank's fraud prevention department that would change everything. The representative explained that there had been some unusual activity on one of my credit cards, and they wanted to verify whether certain charges were legitimate. We're showing several charges to wedding vendors in the Portland area over the past 6 months, the bank representative said. The charges are all legitimate businesses, but the amounts and frequency triggered our monitoring system. Can you confirm whether you authorized these transactions? I went through the list of charges with the representative, confirming the ones I'd made directly and identifying several that I hadn't authorized. There were charges to the florist, the photographer, and the catering company that were larger than what I'd agreed to pay and dated after Jessica had told me the final amounts were settled. It appears that someone has been using your card information to make additional purchases without your knowledge, the representative explained. The card number was used online and over the phone for these unauthorized transactions. Do you have any idea who might have access to your account information? My heart sank as I realized what had happened. Jessica had asked me for my credit card information months earlier to make the initial deposits on various vendors, and I'd trusted her to use it only for the agreed-upon amounts. Instead, she'd apparently continued using my card information to make additional purchases without telling me. I think I know who's responsible, I said. What are my options for addressing this? The bank representative explained that I could file a fraud report and dispute the unauthorized charges. They would investigate the transactions and likely refund the money while pursuing the matter with the person who had used my card illegally. However, since the person who'd used my card was a family member, the situation would be complicated and potentially require legal action. After hanging up with the bank, I spent several hours reviewing my credit card statements and identifying all the charges related to Jessica's wedding. The legitimate charges I'd authorized totaled about $3,000. The unauthorized charges totaled another $1,800, bringing my total involuntary contribution to Jessica's wedding to nearly $5,000. I called my lawyer, someone I'd worked with on business contracts in the past, to get advice about how to handle the situation. She explained that using someone's credit card without permission constituted fraud, even when the person was a family member, and that I had grounds for both criminal and civil action. The question is whether you want to pursue this legally or try to resolve it privately, my lawyer said. Given that this is your sister, you might want to give her an opportunity to make things right before involving law enforcement. I decided to document everything thoroughly before deciding how to proceed. I gathered all the credit card statements, emails about wedding planning, and receipts for expenses I'd covered. I created a detailed timeline of the unauthorized charges and calculated the total amount that had been taken without my permission. The documentation process was revealing because it showed a pattern of financial manipulation that had been ongoing for months. Jessica hadn't just made a few unauthorized charges. She'd systematically used my credit card to cover wedding expenses without telling me, apparently assuming I wouldn't notice or wouldn't challenge her about it. I also discovered that some of the vendors Jessica had been coordinating with had been told that I was covering certain expenses that I'd never agreed to pay for. The photographer had been under the impression that I was paying for an upgraded package that cost significantly more than what we'd originally discussed. The florist had been told that I was covering additional arrangements for the reception that I'd never approved. It became clear that Jessica had been using my name and credit card to upgrade various aspects of her wedding without my knowledge or consent. She'd created a more expensive celebration than what she and Michael could afford by fraudulently charging the additional costs to my account. The financial fraud was serious enough that I knew I couldn't ignore it or try to resolve it through family discussions alone. Jessica had committed crimes that could result in criminal charges, and the amount of money involved was substantial enough to require legal intervention. I called the bank back and filed a formal fraud report, providing all the documentation I'd gathered about the unauthorized charges. I also made an appointment with my lawyer to discuss filing a civil lawsuit to recover the money and potentially pursue criminal charges, depending on how Jessica responded when she learned about the investigation. The decision to take legal action against my own sister was one of the most difficult I'd ever made. But I realized that Jessica's behavior had crossed a line from family conflict into criminal activity. She'd stolen thousands of dollars from me while simultaneously excluding me from her wedding, and that level of betrayal couldn't be addressed through conversation alone. As I prepared the legal documentation, I felt a strange sense of clarity and empowerment. For years, I'd allowed Jessica to take advantage of my generosity and manipulate family dynamics to serve her purposes. But financial fraud was something that had clear legal remedies, and I was finally in a position to hold her accountable for her choices in a way that couldn't be dismissed or minimized. I spent the next few days consulting with my lawyer and the bank's fraud department to ensure that all the proper procedures were being followed. The investigation would take several weeks to complete, but the initial findings were clear enough that criminal charges were likely to be filed regardless of whether Jessica cooperated with the process. The irony wasn't lost on me that Jessica's honeymoon in Hawaii was being partially funded by money she'd stolen from me while I was being excluded from her wedding celebration. She'd managed to have her perfect wedding at my expense, both financially and emotionally, but the financial aspect was about to catch up with her in a way that would have serious legal consequences. I knew that when Jessica returned from Hawaii and learned about the fraud investigation, she would probably try to frame the situation as a misunderstanding or family dispute, rather than acknowledging the criminal nature of her actions. But I was prepared for that response, and I had legal representation to ensure that the matter would be handled appropriately regardless of how she chose to react. The wedding weekend had been painful, but it had also been clarifying. I now understood exactly who Jessica was and what she was capable of when her desires conflicted with other people's rights and well-being. The financial fraud was just the concrete evidence of a character problem that had been manifesting in other ways throughout our relationship. As I prepared for the legal confrontation that was coming, I felt more confident and self-assured than I had in years. I was finally taking action to protect myself and hold someone accountable for taking advantage of my trust and generosity. Whatever happened next, I knew I was doing the right thing for myself and potentially preventing Jessica from victimizing other people in the future. Jessica and Michael returned from Hawaii on a Tuesday afternoon, and by Wednesday morning, the fraud investigation had reached a point where the bank needed to contact Jessica directly about the disputed charges. I knew this because my lawyer had warned me that Jessica would likely receive notification within 24 hours of their return, and I should expect some kind of reaction. I didn't have to wait long. At 11:30 in the morning, while I was in a team meeting at work, my phone started buzzing with call after call from Jessica. When I finally stepped out of the conference room to check my messages, I found 14 missed calls and a series of increasingly frantic text messages. The first message, sent at 11:15, said, "Sarah, call me immediately. Something is very wrong with my bank account." The messages escalated quickly from there. "Why is my credit frozen? What did you do?" Followed by, "This is insane. You can't destroy my life because you're mad about the wedding." And finally, "I'm coming to your office. We need to fix this now." I immediately called my lawyer to let her know that Jessica had been contacted by the bank and was likely on her way to confront me. She advised me to avoid any direct confrontation and to refer Jessica to speak with the bank or with legal counsel if she wanted to discuss the fraud investigation. 20 minutes later, I received a call from the security desk in my office building. "Ms. Chen, there's a woman here claiming to be your sister. She's quite upset and insisting that she needs to see you immediately. Should we allow her up?" I could hear Jessica's voice in the background, raised and angry, demanding to speak. With me, the security guard sounded concerned about her emotional state, and I knew that Jessica was probably creating a scene in the lobby of my professional workplace. "Please tell her that I'm in meetings all afternoon and suggest that she call to schedule an appointment if she wants to discuss something," I said. "If she becomes disruptive, please follow your standard protocols for handling difficult visitors." The security guard relayed my message, and I could hear Jessica's voice becoming even louder and more agitated. She was clearly not accepting the suggestion to call for an appointment, and after a few more minutes, the security guard came back on the line. "Ms. Chen, I'm afraid we're going to need to ask your sister to leave the premises. She's becoming disruptive and disturbing other visitors." Is there anything else you'd like us to tell her? Just that she can reach me through normal channels if she wants to have a civilized conversation, I said. Thank you for handling the situation professionally. 20 minutes later, Jessica was calling me again, this time from her car outside. My building. Sarah, this is ridiculous, she said when I answered. You can't hide behind security guards when we need to talk about something this serious. I'm not hiding, Jessica. I'm at work, during work hours, trying to do my job. If you want to discuss the bank investigation, you should probably talk to the bank or get a lawyer. Bank investigation? Jessica's voice went up an octave. Sarah, what bank investigation? The bank called and said there were disputed charges on my account, but they wouldn't tell me what that meant. What did you do? I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm and factual. I didn't do anything, Jessica. I reviewed my credit card statements after the wedding and discovered that you'd been making charges without my authorization. I reported those charges to my bank as fraud, which is what they are. Fraud? Jessica sounded genuinely shocked, as if the idea that using someone's credit card without permission might be considered fraud had never occurred to her. Sarah, those weren't fraud charges. Those were wedding expenses that we talked about. No, Jessica, they weren't. We talked about specific amounts for specific vendors, and you agreed to those amounts. Then you continued using my card information to make additional purchases without telling me. That's fraud. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and when Jessica spoke again, her voice was smaller and more uncertain. I thought you wouldn't mind. The extra charges were for things that made the wedding better, and I knew you wanted the wedding to be perfect. You thought I wouldn't mind you stealing $1,800 from me? I asked. Jessica, you used my credit card to pay for wedding upgrades that you couldn't afford, without asking my permission, or even telling me you were doing it. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft. But we're family, Jessica said, and her voice was becoming tearful. I wasn't trying to steal from you. I was just trying to make sure the wedding was everything it could be. I thought you'd understand. Being family doesn't give you the right to use my money without permission, I said firmly. And it doesn't excuse lying to me about what you were spending or using my credit card information fraudulently. Jessica started crying then, the kind of dramatic sobbing that she'd used to get her way since childhood. Sarah, please, you have to help me fix this. The bank froze my account and they're saying there might be criminal charges. I can't handle this right now. Michael and I just got back from our honeymoon and everything is falling apart. For a moment, I felt the familiar tug of sympathy and the impulse to solve Jessica's problem for her. But I also remembered how she'd treated me during the wedding planning, how she'd excluded me from important moments while stealing my money to pay for the celebration. The crying that had once motivated me to fix her problems now sounded manipulative and calculated. Jessica, this isn't something I can fix for you, I said. You committed fraud by using my credit card without authorization. The bank is investigating because I reported the unauthorized charges. If you want to address this situation, you need to talk to a lawyer, not to me. How can you be so cold? Jessica demanded, her tone shifting from tears to anger. I'm your sister, and you're destroying my life over some stupid charges. This is going to ruin my marriage and my reputation and my career, all because you can't let go of being mad about the wedding. This has nothing to do with being mad about the wedding, I said, though of course it was connected to the broader pattern of Jessica's behavior. This is about you committing crimes and facing the consequences of those choices. They're not crimes, Jessica shouted. They're family expenses that got mixed up in the wedding planning. You're the one making this into something criminal. By involving lawyers and banks instead of just talking to me directly, I realized that Jessica genuinely believed her own rationalization, that she'd convinced herself that using my credit card without permission was somehow justified by our family relationship and by her desires for her wedding to be perfect. She couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge that taking someone else's money without permission was theft, regardless of the circumstances or relationships involved. "Jessica, I'm going to hang up now," I said. "If you want to discuss this further, you should contact my lawyer. Her information is available through the bank as part of the fraud investigation." "Sarah, please don't do this," Jessica said, and her voice was desperate now. "Please don't destroy your own sister over money. I'll pay you back every penny. I promise. Just make this investigation go away." "It's too late for that," I said. "You should have thought about the consequences before you decided to use my credit card without permission." I hung up and immediately called my lawyer to update her on the conversation. She wasn't surprised by Jessica's response, explaining that people who commit financial fraud often have trouble understanding the seriousness of their actions, especially when the victims are family members. She's going to keep trying to frame this as a family dispute rather than acknowledging the criminal behavior, my lawyer warned. "Don't let her manipulate you into feeling guilty about pursuing this legally. You're the victim here, not the aggressor." That afternoon, I received several more calls from Jessica, but I let them go to voicemail. I also received a call from Michael, who sounded confused and upset about the situation. I referred him to my lawyer as well, explaining that I couldn't discuss the details of an ongoing fraud investigation directly with people who might be involved. By evening, Jessica had apparently recruited our parents to intervene on her behalf. My mother called around dinner time, sounding worried and confused about what was happening between Jessica and me. "Sarah, honey, Jessica called us crying about some kind of legal problem involving you and her wedding expenses," my mother said. "She says you're trying to have her arrested over a misunderstanding about credit card charges. Can you help me understand what's going on?" I explained the situation to my mother as objectively as possible, emphasizing the financial fraud aspect rather than the wedding drama. My mother was shocked to learn that Jessica had been using my credit card without permission, and she agreed that such behavior was unacceptable regardless of family relationships. "I had no idea Jessica was doing anything like that," my mother said. "She told us that you were helping pay for parts of the wedding, but she never mentioned that she was using your card without your knowledge. She wasn't just using my card without my knowledge, Mom. She was making charges that we never discussed and upgrading things that I never agreed to pay for. She stole almost $2,000 from me while planning a wedding that excluded me from important roles." My mother was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. "Sarah, I know the wedding planning was stressful for everyone, and I know there were some hurt feelings about the arrangements. But credit card fraud is a serious accusation. Are you sure that's really what happened?" I appreciated that my mother was trying to understand the situation objectively rather than automatically taking Jessica's side. But I was also frustrated that she seemed to think there might be some middle ground between fraud and misunderstanding. "Mom, Jessica used my credit card number to make purchases I didn't authorize and never told me about. The bank's fraud department has identified the unauthorized transactions. There's no ambiguity about what happened." "But surely this can be resolved within the family," my mother said. "Jessica says she's willing to pay you back for any extra charges. Can't you just work this out privately instead of involving lawyers? And banks?" "It's too late for that," I explained. "The fraud investigation is already underway, and Jessica committed crimes that have consequences beyond just paying me back. She needs to face those consequences so she understands that this behavior is unacceptable." My mother seemed to understand my position, though I could tell she was struggling with the idea of one daughter pursuing legal action against another. We talked for another 20 minutes about the situation, and by the end of the conversation, she seemed to support my decision to hold Jessica accountable for her actions. "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself," my mother said finally. "I know this must be incredibly difficult, but you're right that Jessica needs to face the consequences of her choices. Maybe this will help her grow up and start taking responsibility for her behavior." 2 weeks after Jessica and Michael returned from Hawaii, I received a call from Amanda that would provide the final piece of evidence I needed to fully understand the scope of Jessica's manipulation. Amanda sounded upset and wanted to meet in person to share something she'd discovered about the wedding planning process. We met at the same cafe where we'd talked before, and Amanda immediately pulled out her phone to show me a series of screenshots. "Sarah, I found something that I think you need to see. It's going to be hard to look at, but it explains everything about what really happened during the wedding planning." Amanda explained that she'd been going through her text messages from the months leading up to the wedding, trying to understand her own role in the situation and how she'd been manipulated into participating in my exclusion. What she'd found was a detailed record of conversations between her and Jessica that revealed the calculated nature of Jessica's planning. The first screenshot was from early in the wedding planning process, about 6 months before the wedding. Jessica had texted Amanda saying, "I need your help with something. Sarah thinks she's going to be my maid of honor, but I want you to do it. She's too controlling and she'll try to take over everything if I give her that role." Amanda showed me message after message where Jessica had strategically built a case against me, painting me as overbearing and attention-seeking while positioning Amanda as the better choice for maid of honor. Jessica had told Amanda that I was always trying to be the center of attention, and that I would probably wear white to the wedding if I thought I could get away with it. "I believed all of this," Amanda said, looking ashamed. "Jessica was so convincing about your supposed flaws that I actually thought I was helping her by agreeing to be maid of honor. I thought I was protecting her from a controlling sister." The messages got worse as the wedding planning progressed. Jessica had shared detailed strategies for excluding me from important activities while still maintaining access to my money and planning abilities. She'd told Amanda that she was managing Sarah's expectations so that I wouldn't make a scene about not being maid of honor. One particularly damaging message, sent just 2 weeks before the wedding, showed Jessica bragging about how well her manipulation was working. "Sarah has no idea that I've been using her credit card for upgrades," Jessica had written. "She thinks she's just paying for basic flowers and photography, but I've been getting us the premium packages. By the time she figures it out, the wedding will be over, and it'll be too late for her to do anything about it." Amanda showed me another message where Jessica had explicitly discussed her plan to exclude me from wedding party photos while keeping me available for logistical support. "The trick is to make Sarah feel included enough that she keeps helping with planning, but not so included that she overshadows me on my big day," Jessica had written. The most shocking message was one where Jessica had discussed her long-term strategy for managing our family relationships after the wedding. "Once I'm married, I'll have more leverage with the family," she'd written. "Sarah won't be able to play the successful single sister card anymore, and I'll be the one with the stable marriage and the real adult life." Reading these messages was like being punched in the stomach repeatedly. Jessica hadn't just excluded me from her wedding on impulse or because of wedding stress. She'd planned a systematic campaign to marginalize me while exploiting my resources, and she'd been proud of how cleverly she was executing her strategy. "Amanda, why are you showing me this?" I asked, though I was grateful for the evidence even as it hurt to read. "Because I can't live with having been part of this," Amanda said. "I thought I was helping a friend navigate a difficult family situation, but I was actually helping her abuse and manipulate her sister. I feel sick about it, and I think you deserve to know the truth about what really happened." Amanda went on to explain that she'd confronted Jessica about these messages after Jessica had called her asking for help with the misunderstanding about the credit card charges. Jessica had initially tried to deny that the messages meant what they obviously meant, then had become angry with Amanda for betraying her by screenshot evidence. "She told me that I didn't understand the complexity of your relationship and that you'd always been jealous of her," Amanda said. "But reading these messages made me realize that Jessica was the jealous one and that she'd been projecting her own issues onto you." I asked Amanda if she would be willing to provide copies of these messages to my lawyer as evidence of Jessica's deliberate fraud and manipulation. The messages clearly showed that Jessica had knowingly used my credit card without permission and had planned to conceal the unauthorized charges until after the wedding. Absolutely, Amanda said. I want to help fix this in whatever way I can. I should have questioned Jessica's stories about you from the beginning, and I should have recognized the manipulation for what it was. Amanda's evidence was devastating because it showed premeditation and conscious intent to commit fraud. Jessica couldn't claim that the unauthorized charges were mistakes or misunderstandings when she'd explicitly bragged about using my credit card for upgrades without my knowledge. I called my lawyer immediately after leaving the cafe and forwarded Amanda's screenshots to her. My lawyer was excited about the evidence because it proved that Jessica had committed fraud knowingly and had planned to conceal her crimes until it was too late for me to seek recourse. This changes everything, my lawyer said. With this evidence, we can demonstrate clear intent to defraud, which makes the criminal charges much more serious. Jessica won't be able to claim this was a family misunderstanding or a communication problem. The next day, I received another unexpected piece of evidence when the wedding photographer called me directly. He explained that he'd been contacted by the bank's fraud investigation team and had been asked to provide documentation about payments and authorization for his services. Ms. Chen, I think there's something you should know about the photography charges, he said. Your sister upgraded to our premium package about 2 weeks before the wedding, adding about $800 to the total cost. She told me that you had authorized the upgrade and would be covering the additional expense. The photographer went on to explain that Jessica had specifically requested that he not mention the upgrade to me directly, claiming that it was meant to be a surprise. She'd told him that the additional cost would be charged to my credit card automatically, and that I didn't need to be involved in the payment process. I thought it was unusual, the photographer admitted. Normally, the person paying for services wants to be involved in any changes to the scope or cost. But your sister was very insistent that you'd authorized everything and that you wanted to surprise the couple with the enhanced package. I thanked the photographer for calling and added his information to the evidence file that my lawyer was building. The pattern was becoming clear. Jessica had used my credit card information with multiple vendors, telling each of them that I had authorized the charges while specifically requesting that they not confirm the upgrades with me directly. It was a sophisticated fraud scheme that had required planning and coordination across multiple vendors and transactions. Jessica had carefully orchestrated a situation where she could upgrade her wedding services using my money while ensuring that I wouldn't discover the unauthorized charges until after the wedding was over. A month after the wedding, Jessica's legal problems had escalated to the point where she was facing formal criminal charges for credit card fraud. The bank's investigation had confirmed that she'd made unauthorized charges totaling over $2,000, and the district attorney's office had decided to prosecute the case, despite the family relationship involved. Jessica had apparently been telling people that the legal situation was a misunderstanding that would be resolved quietly, but when the criminal charges were filed, the news became public record. Several family members and mutual friends learned about the fraud charges through online court records, and the information began spreading through our social circles. I received a call from my Uncle Robert, who had seen the court filing and wanted to understand what had happened. He was shocked to learn about the credit card fraud and supportive of my decision to pursue legal action. Sarah, I had no idea Jessica was capable of something like this, he said. The family has been hearing bits and pieces about wedding drama, but nobody mentioned that she'd been stealing money from you. Uncle Robert's call was followed by similar conversations with other family members who were learning about the situation for the first time. Most were surprised by the revelation of financial fraud, and many expressed regret that they hadn't understood the true nature of the conflict during the wedding weekend. My cousin Maya called to tell me that she'd had a confrontation with Jessica at a family gathering the previous weekend. She tried to tell everyone that you were being vindictive about the wedding and using the legal system to hurt her, Maya said. But when I mentioned the credit card fraud, she got really defensive and started crying about how misunderstood she was. Maya went on to explain that Jessica had been trying to control the narrative about our conflict, telling family members that I was overreacting to minor wedding planning disagreements. The revelation of the criminal charges had made it impossible for Jessica to maintain that story, forcing her to acknowledge that more serious issues were involved. People are starting to realize that this isn't just about hurt feelings or wedding logistics, Maya said. When someone gets charged with fraud, it becomes clear that real crimes were committed. The most significant public revelation came when Michael called me directly to apologize for his wife's behavior and to ask what he could do to help resolve the situation. He sounded devastated and explained that he'd had no idea about the credit card fraud until Jessica was arrested. "Sarah, I am so sorry," Michael said, and his voice was shaky with emotion. "I knew that Jessica had been difficult about the wedding planning, but I had no idea she was stealing from you. If I'd known, I would have stopped it immediately." Michael went on to explain that Jessica had been lying to him about the source of funding for various wedding upgrades, telling him that I had volunteered to pay for enhanced services when in fact she'd been charging them to my credit card without my knowledge. "She told me that you wanted to make our wedding extra special and that you'd insisted on paying for the premium photography package and the upgraded flowers," Michael said. "I thought it was incredibly generous of you, and I was planning to write you a thank you note for your extraordinary support." The conversation with Michael was both heartbreaking and validating. He was clearly devastated to learn that his new wife had committed crimes to pay for their wedding, and he was struggling with the implications for their marriage. But his shock and horror at Jessica's behavior confirmed that I wasn't overreacting or being vindictive in pursuing legal action. "Michael, this isn't your fault," I told him. "You were lied to, just like I was. Jessica manipulated both of us to get what she wanted." "But what do I do now?" Michael asked. "I'm married to someone who committed fraud to pay for our wedding. How do I live with that? How do I trust her after something like this?" I couldn't answer those questions for him, but I encouraged him to consider counseling and to think seriously about what Jessica's behavior revealed about her character and her approach to relationships. 2 days later, I learned that Michael had moved out of the apartment he shared with Jessica and was staying with friends while he decided what to do about their marriage. The revelation of the fraud charges had apparently been the final straw in a series of problems he'd been noticing since their return from the honeymoon. Amanda called to tell me that she'd spoken with Michael and that he'd shared some disturbing information about Jessica's behavior during the honeymoon. He said that Jessica spent most of the trip complaining about family members and talking about how she was going to manage relationships now that she was married, Amanda said. He started to realize that she saw marriage as a way to gain power and leverage rather than as a partnership. The public nature of the criminal charges was having exactly the effect that Jessica had been trying to avoid through all her manipulation and lies. Instead of being seen as a beautiful bride who'd had a perfect wedding, she was now known as someone who'd committed fraud against her own sister to pay for her celebration. Jessica's social media accounts, which had been full of wedding photos and honeymoon pictures, went dark as news of the criminal charges spread. She couldn't maintain the image of wedded bliss when her marriage was falling apart and she was facing potential jail time for financial crimes. The contrast between the wedding weekend, when Jessica had seemed to have everything she wanted, and the current situation was stark. Her attempts to exclude me while exploiting my resources had backfired spectacularly, leaving her facing criminal charges and a crumbling marriage while I had emerged stronger and more self-assured than ever. 6 months after Jessica's wedding, the legal case reached its conclusion in a way that exceeded even my lawyer's expectations. Jessica had initially tried to fight the charges, claiming that the credit card use was authorized and that any confusion was due to poor communication during wedding planning. However, Amanda's text message evidence and the photographer's testimony had made Jessica's position untenable. Faced with overwhelming evidence of premeditated fraud, Jessica's lawyer had advised her to accept a plea bargain that included full restitution, community service, and probation. She would avoid jail time, but she would have a criminal record and would be required to make monthly payments to repay all the money she'd stolen from me, plus legal fees and penalties. The restitution amount had grown beyond the original unauthorized charges because the legal process had uncovered additional fraudulent activity. Jessica had apparently been using my credit card information for personal purchases beyond the wedding expenses, including clothing, meals, and entertainment that had nothing to do with the wedding planning. The total amount she owes you is now just over $4,000, my lawyer explained. She'll be making monthly payments of $200 until it's paid off. Plus, she's responsible for all the legal fees and court costs. More satisfying than the financial restitution was the impact the legal case had on Jessica's reputation and relationships. Word of the criminal charges had spread through our social circles, and Jessica was facing social consequences that went far beyond the legal penalties. Several mutual friends had reached out to apologize for not understanding the situation during the wedding weekend. They'd assumed that any family tension was normal wedding stress, but learning about the fraud had made them realize that Jessica's behavior toward me had been much more serious than typical sibling conflict. Michael had filed for divorce too, months after the criminal charges were filed, citing irreconcilable differences and Jessica's pattern of deceptive behavior. He'd told several people that the credit card fraud was just one example of Jessica's willingness to lie and manipulate to get what she wanted, and that he couldn't build a marriage with someone he couldn't trust. The divorce proceedings had revealed additional financial problems in Jessica's life. She'd apparently been living beyond her means for years, using credit cards and personal loans to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford. The wedding fraud was part of a larger pattern of financial irresponsibility and deception. Amanda had become an unexpected ally in the aftermath of the legal case. She'd been so disturbed by her role in Jessica's manipulation that she'd made a point of telling mutual friends and family members about the text messages that proved Jessica's deliberate exclusion of me from the wedding. "I feel like I need to help repair the damage that was done to your reputation," Amanda told me during one of our coffee meetings. "Jessica spent months telling people that you were difficult and controlling, and I repeated those lies. The least I can do is make sure people know the truth." Amanda's advocacy had been particularly helpful with our college friends, many of whom had only heard Jessica's version of events during the wedding planning. Learning about the text messages and the systematic nature of Jessica's manipulation had changed their perspective on the family conflict dramatically. The wedding photographer had also become an unexpected supporter. He'd been so disturbed by Jessica's deceptive use of my credit card that he'd written a detailed account of their interactions for the legal case. His statement had helped establish the premeditated nature of Jessica's fraud. "I want other vendors to know what happened so they can protect themselves from similar situations in the future," he'd told me. "What your sister did was sophisticated, fraud that could have been prevented if I'd insisted on direct authorization from the cardholder." 6 months after the wedding, I found myself in a completely different place than I'd expected to be. Instead of having a complicated but functional relationship with my sister, I had no relationship with her at all. Jessica had made no attempt to apologize for her behavior or to take responsibility for the damage she'd caused to our family relationships. The last time I'd spoken with Jessica was during a court-ordered mediation session where she'd been required to acknowledge her fraudulent activity as part of the plea agreement. Even then, she'd focused on minimizing her actions and complaining about the consequences rather than expressing genuine remorse for what she'd done. "I never meant for things to get this complicated," Jessica had said during the mediation. "I just wanted my wedding to be perfect, and I thought Sarah would understand that family sometimes means making sacrifices for each other." Her inability to understand that stealing money wasn't a sacrifice I should be expected to make had confirmed my decision to cut off contact with her entirely. Jessica wasn't capable of taking responsibility for her choices or of building relationships based on mutual respect and honesty. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.